Happy slaves are the fiercest enemies of freedom. Karl Marx. Before we begin, here's a small ritual. Write in the comments one word that accurately describes your current state. Sign it, and let's get started. You didn't choose this life. You were born into a stage already set, where the lines were written, the costumes prepared, and the script rehearsed by generations before you. From the moment you opened your eyes, the world began to define you. Your name was given, your language chosen, your gods introduced. You were taught what's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable, what's dangerous. You didn't discover yourself. You were built, carefully, systematically. You learned early that love is conditional. Approval depended on obedience. You were rewarded when you followed the rules and subtly punished when you didn't. Not with violence. That's not needed anymore, but with coldness, silence, a withdrawal of warmth. So you adapted. You smiled when you didn't feel like it. You apologized when you weren't sorry. You said yes when your soul screamed no. Bit by bit, your real self was buried under masks. And you didn't even notice, because everyone around you was doing the same. They called it education, but it was domestication. The system doesn't want wild hearts. It wants manageable units. The classroom became the first factory line. Every child pressed into the same mold. Sit still, memorize, obey, don't question. Excellence meant compliance. Creativity was a threat. And so, little by little, you forgot how to feel, how to resist, how to trust your own inner voice. You were told you're free, that you live in a modern, open world. But your choices were always pre-selected. You were shown doors, but never the key. You could pick your job, your partner, your brand of shoes, but never step outside the invisible borders drawn around your mind. Everything you believed you wanted was handed to you by a system designed to keep you chasing. You dreamed dreams that weren't yours. You wanted things because others wanted them. And the more you achieved, the more hollow it felt. They taught you to be productive, not fulfilled. To be nice, not real. To be successful, not alive. You were measured by how well you fit, not how deeply you felt. And every time you played along, the system applauded. You became a model citizen. Silent, predictable, efficient. But somewhere deep down, a strange emptiness remained. A voice you couldn't explain. Something quietly screaming that this, all of this, isn't it. They never had to lock you up. They just gave you toys, distractions, endless noise. You scroll for hours, you binge, you numb. They have made sure your mind is always busy, your soul always quiet. The most effective prison is the one you decorate yourself. And that's exactly what they built. Not a cage of iron, but a cage of ideas. And the greatest trick of all, they convinced you that happiness is outside you, that you have to earn it, search for it, compete for it. That one day, if you work hard enough, smile wide enough, fit in just right, it will finally come. But it never does. Because it was never lost, it was hidden, buried under layers of false promises and silent conditioning. You've been shaped, not raised, programmed, not awakened, trained to follow, not to feel. And the system smiles, because it knows the most obedient slaves are the ones who think they're free. But now, something inside you stirs. Not anger, not yet, not rebellion. Something quieter, a flicker, a question you don't say out loud, a pause in your steps. And in that pause, you begin to see that the bars weren't made of steel, they were made of fear. That the cage was never locked, that maybe, just maybe, The door has always been open. They told you that happiness is something you earn, that you must deserve it, work for it, behave to receive it, that one day, after the right degree, the right job, the right partner, the right vacation, you'll finally have it. And you believed them because they told the story well. They wrapped it in shiny images, in smiles from screens, in promises whispered through advertising, school lessons, motivational speeches. Not direct lies, something more dangerous. A consistent, slow drip of half-truths shaping your view of life like water carving stone. They taught you that happiness looks like success, that success means approval, that approval comes from others. So, you began to perform. You crafted a version of yourself designed to be liked. You filtered your truth. You measured your worth in applause, attention, reaction. You became a brand, not a being. A performance, not a person. And every time it felt empty, you blamed yourself. Maybe you just hadn't done enough. Maybe you needed more, a better body, a bigger salary, a more aesthetic life. But what they didn't tell you is that the entire picture of happiness they sold you was manufactured, designed, strategically placed to keep you running. Because a human chasing happiness outside of themselves is easy to control, easy to sell to, easy to guide. You were never meant to catch it, only to keep chasing. They gave you idols to admire, but never to become. They gave you beauty standards you'd never reach, lifestyles you'd never afford, timelines that always made you feel late. It wasn't about happiness, it was about hunger. And the system feeds on hungry people. People who are never enough. People who stay busy fixing themselves instead of questioning the design. This illusion of happiness is not a mistake. It's a mechanism. It keeps you distracted, chasing validation through jobs, likes, followers, partners. It keeps you doubting your instincts. It keeps you consuming. Because if you ever stopped and looked inward, truly looked, you'd see it. You'd see that your sadness isn't personal. It's systemic. That the pressure isn't your failure, it's the design. You're told that something's wrong with you when you feel empty. But what if the truth is that something's wrong with the world you were placed in? A world where aliveness is secondary to efficiency, where beauty is a product, where rest is laziness, where silence is awkward, where depth is too much. They made you believe that being okay means smiling, performing, achieving. So you wore the mask. You played the part, even when you were tired, even when you were broken inside, because that's what everyone else was doing too. You didn't want to be the weak one, the strange one, the one who didn't fit. But fitting in is the death of truth, of joy, of soul, because happiness was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be noticed, felt, grown inside you, like a fire, not a trophy. And here's the trap. The more you chase the image, the further you drift from the source. That's why it always slips away. That's why no amount of money, attention, or comfort ever truly satisfies. And they know that. That's why they keep selling you the next thing, the next solution, the next transformation. Not to free you, to keep you busy, to keep you consuming. You're more valuable to them as a seeker than as someone who has found. The illusion isn't that happiness exists. The illusion is where to find it. They put it just out of reach. Just one more step. Just one more level. And if you collapse from exhaustion, they'll offer therapy, pills, self-help books, all to keep you within the game. But the game was never yours. And still, something inside you resists. A small voice that says, this can't be all there is. A hunger for something real. Not loud, not shiny, just true. A kind of peace that doesn't need proof. A kind of joy that isn't explained but lived. You begin to see that happiness isn't in the reward. It's in reclaiming your inner authority, in choosing your own pace, in stepping off the track and letting the race run without you. Not because you've lost, but because you've remembered you were never a racer to begin with. And here comes the most dangerous truth for the system. A human who no longer chases is no longer controlled. A human who finds joy in silence, in presence, in their own rhythm, becomes untouchable. That kind of person doesn't buy things to fill holes. That kind of person doesn't follow trends to feel alive. That kind of person begins to live on their own terms. And the system has no script for that. So they will call you lazy, selfish, strange, unrealistic. But deep down, they fear what you represent. The possibility of freedom. Not the loud, dramatic, performative kind. The quiet kind. The kind that walks away from noise. That smiles without needing to impress. That creates without needing to compete. And it starts small. In your breath. In your decisions. In your refusal to chase what doesn't feel true. In your return to what feels like home, not the one you were born into, but the one inside your chest, the one that's been waiting silently, patiently, for you to stop running and listen. That's the beginning of an end to the illusion, an end to the mask, an end to the belief that your joy belongs to anyone else but you. The system doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't break you. It bends you slowly, gently, over time. It knows that force creates resistance. But suggestion, that's a softer weapon. And so it uses 3 precise instruments to shape your mind. Fear, guilt, and shame. Not in bursts, but as a constant background hum. Always there, always working. Fear is the first and strongest thread. Not the primal fear of physical danger, but social fear. Fear of losing your place. Fear of being excluded. Fear of being called wrong, difficult, delusional. You fear stepping out of line, not because of punishment, but because of invisibility. You've been trained to need permission, applause, reassurance. That's how the system keeps you tame. When fear runs your nervous system, you stay small. You play safe. You don't question. You obey, even when nothing around you makes sense. Then comes guilt. A deep, subtle guilt for wanting what doesn't fit the plan. Guilt for resting. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for needing space. Guilt for feeling too much. The system programs you to believe that your natural instincts are selfish, that your boundaries are rude, that your body is lazy. So you learn to override yourself. You abandon your needs to meet expectations. And every time you do, the guilt quiets, temporarily. But the cost is your aliveness. And underneath it all, shame. Not about what you do, but about who you are. You were made to feel too loud, too soft, too intense, too sensitive, too much or not enough. Shame isn't loud. It doesn't push. It seeps. It teaches you to hide, to shrink, to filter, to disappear in plain sight. A person carrying shame can be led anywhere because they believe they must prove they deserve to exist. This is how the system trains obedience, not with chains, but with emotions. It teaches you to internalize the enemy, to question yourself instead of questioning the game. When something feels wrong, you assume it's your fault. You work harder, smile wider, push through, and the system applauds because you've become your own warden, your own judge, your own suppressor. It's a genius design, a machine that feeds on your self-doubt, a world where rebellion is framed as mental illness, where questioning is seen as instability, where going slow is laziness, where softness is weakness. You're kept spinning, always performing, always adjusting, always trying to fit into a shape that was never made for you. And when the system notices cracks, exhaustion, sadness, rage, it responds, not with truth, but with treatment. It doesn't ask what's wrong with the world. It asks what's wrong with you. It medicalizes your burnout, monetizes your pain. It prescribes pills and programs and productivity hacks, all designed to get you back to functioning, not to healing. Because a healed person might stop participating, and that is the real threat. So you stay trapped in a cycle, work hard, burn out, recover just enough to keep going. You wear your exhaustion like a badge. You confuse survival with strength. But deep down, you know that this isn't living. It's enduring. It's existing inside a box with moving walls. And yet, even in all of this, the system still fears one thing: awareness. Because awareness breaks the spell. The moment you see the pattern, you're no longer inside it. You begin to notice the fear and ask where it came from. You feel the guilt, but don't obey it. You face the shame and still choose to speak. Awareness doesn't scream. It notices. It observes the manipulation without absorbing it. It creates space between the trigger and the response. And in that space, everything changes. That's where the first act of rebellion happens. Not in protests, not in arguments, in attention, in presence, in the choice to pause and feel instead of react and perform. That moment when you say, maybe I'm not the problem, that's where freedom begins. Quietly, gently, powerfully. From the earliest years, you were taught to split yourself in two. There was the part that smiled, followed the rules, stayed pleasant and safe. And there was the part you were told to hide. The angry part, the wild part, the chaotic, intense, emotional, hungry, raw part. The part that asked uncomfortable questions. The part that didn't care about being liked. The part that burned. That's your shadow, and they taught you to fear it. You learned quickly which pieces of yourself were welcome and which ones would cost you love. So you locked the others away. You became civilized, controlled, acceptable. But that didn't mean those parts disappeared. They just went underground. They lived in your silence, in your tension, in your numbness, and the longer you suppressed them, the more they festered. Not because they were evil, but because they were neglected. The system needs you fragmented. It needs you to reject the parts of yourself that threaten obedience. Anger, for example, real clean anger, is power. It's your boundary, your compass, your fire. But they made you believe that anger is violence, that it's dangerous, uncivilized. So you swallowed it, smiled through it, pushed it deeper and deeper until it started turning against you. That's when anger becomes depression, when unexpressed power turns inward and rots, and desire, raw, instinctual desire, was painted as selfish, dirty, shameful. So you dimmed it. You made yourself small to feel safe. You said yes when you meant no. You performed care instead of feeling it. You gave until you were empty and still felt guilty for needing something back. You were taught that sacrifice is noble, that being good means disappearing a little more each day. They've created a culture where light is rewarded and darkness is punished. But the darkness isn't the enemy, it's the place where your truth lives, your wildness, your intuition, your resistance. That's why they fear it, because a person who has reclaimed their shadow cannot be manipulated. They don't obey out of fear. They don't apologize for their existence. They're rooted, clear, alive. You were never broken. You were incomplete. By design, you were handed a version of yourself edited for mass consumption. All the messy, unpredictable parts were sliced out. But those are the parts that carry your soul. That's where your art is, your voice, your instinct to walk away when things don't feel right. The system didn't just take your freedom, it took your wholeness. But the shadow waits. It never leaves. It watches from the corner, waiting for you to turn around and meet it. Not with fear, but with honesty. Not to destroy it, but to listen. What does your anger want to tell you? What is your sadness protecting? What has your numbness been trying to escape? Reclaiming your shadow is not chaos. It's clarity. It's no longer pretending to be okay when you're not. It's saying no without guilt. It's owning your need for solitude, your hunger for truth, your refusal to fake it anymore. It's learning to hold both your tenderness and your fire without apology. And when you do that, something breaks. Not in you, in the script. The roles no longer fit. The performance stops making sense. You no longer need to be liked to feel valid. You no longer need permission to exist. That's when the system starts to lose its grip, because you've stepped off the stage. The shadow is not your weakness, it's your gateway back to wholeness. The path to real happiness does not lead around the dark, it goes through it. The parts you've buried are the exact ones you need to come alive, the parts that make you real, that make you dangerous, not in the violent way they warned you about, but in the truthful way that can't be silenced. And here's the secret they never wanted you to learn. Once you reclaim your full self, your light and your dark, your calm and your rage, your softness and your fire, you no longer fit in the cage. You outgrow it, not with force, not with rebellion, with truth. Quiet, steady, undeniable truth. That's what they fear most. Not noise, not protests, but a person who finally remembers who they were before the world told them who to be. The system isn't just something you live in. It's something you become attached to. Not because it's good for you, but because it's familiar. It offers structure, identity, roles to play. It tells you who you are and what matters. Even when it drains you, it comforts you. Even when it numbs you, it makes you feel normal. That's the trap. Not brutal control, emotional dependency. And most don't even realize they're hooked. You wake up and reach for your phone before you breathe. You scroll, you absorb, you compare. Your nervous system is fed constant stimulation. Opinions, tragedies, products, ideals, everything moving so fast, you never fully process any of it. And that's exactly the point. The system doesn't want reflection. It wants reactivity. The more you consume, the less you feel. The more you chase, the less you notice. You think you're choosing, but the speed is choosing for you. Entertainment, news, gossip, trends, crises. None of it nourishes. Most of it distorts, but it gives the illusion of connection, of awareness, of movement. You're always in motion, yet going nowhere. Your mind becomes a hallway of other people's voices, and you forget what your own voice sounds like. You forget silence. You forget stillness, and slowly you begin to fear them. This is not accidental. The system is engineered to hijack your attention, because attention is energy, and energy is power. If they can keep your eyes busy, they can keep your soul asleep. And they use everything to do it. Media, apps, advertisements, social validation. It's not just about selling you things. It's about keeping you dependent on external input to feel anything at all. Over time, you start mistaking distraction for relief. You check out instead of checking in. You consume content instead of facing your discomfort. You numb the symptoms instead of healing the source. And the more you escape your inner world, the more control the outer world has over you. You become someone who needs noise, constant company, endless stimulation. You say you're bored when you're alone, but boredom is not the problem. It's the withdrawal. From a life lived through screens, roles, performances, real life, raw, quiet, slow, starts to feel unbearable. And that's when you know you're not just living in the system. You've been wired to need it. But the cost is everything. Your intuition dulls. Your capacity to feel joy fades. You stop hearing the signals from your body. You stop trusting your instincts because all the real parts of you have been overrun by the endless loop of survival and stimulation. You no longer rest. You collapse. You no longer feel. You react. You no longer live. You maintain. And the system thrives on that. It doesn't need you happy. It needs you functioning. It needs you tired enough to obey, but not broken enough to stop. It needs you disoriented, self-doubting, externally focused. It needs you buying into the illusion that your next fix, your next upgrade, your next goal, your next follow account will finally give you peace. But it never does. You end up living a ghost life, a life that looks full but feels hollow. Smiles in photos, laughter on the surface, achievements that don't land. And late at night, when everything goes quiet, a heavy emptiness settles in. That's your soul knocking. Not gently, not anymore. Because it's tired of being muted. It's tired of being replaced by the system's noise. And at some point, maybe now, something breaks. Not loudly, but decisively. You realize that nothing outside of you will ever be enough if the inside is starving. You realize that silence isn't empty. It's sacred. That stillness isn't laziness. It's where truth lives. You begin to crave slowness, depth, presence, realness. Not because they're trendy, but because they're the only things that still feel alive. And that's where the detox begins. Not by running away, but by coming back. Back into your breath, back into your body, back into your senses, back into this exact moment, without needing to perform it or post about it. You start saying no, not out of rebellion, but out of wisdom. You stop responding to every ping, every trend, every demand for attention. You start creating boundaries, not just for others, but for your own sanity. This is not easy. The system will call you selfish, out of touch, dramatic. Your own mind will scream for distraction. Your own body will ache for the old rhythms. But every time you stay, every time you breathe through the discomfort, you're rewiring yourself back to truth, back to presence, back to life that is felt, not performed. And slowly, the noise fades, the tension melts, the addiction weakens, and in the quiet, something ancient returns. Your clarity, the kind that can't be sold, the kind that isn't influenced by trends, the kind that belongs to you and only you. That's the beginning of real freedom. When the system loses your attention, it loses its power, and you, finally, begin to reclaim your own. There comes a moment when the illusion can no longer hold. It doesn't happen like in the movies, no explosions, no dramatic speeches. It begins with fatigue, a deep, soul-level exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. You start to feel disconnected from the role you've been playing. You smile, but it feels hollow. You succeed, but it tastes like dust. You check all the boxes, and yet something inside you quietly asks, why does it still feel wrong? That moment, when the dissonance becomes unbearable, is sacred. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough in disguise. Because for the first time, you're no longer fully hypnotized. You begin to suspect that maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe you're not lazy, ungrateful, or lost. Maybe you've just been living in a structure that doesn't support your truth. That's not dysfunction, that's awakening. But awakening doesn't feel like light at first. It feels like grief, like losing something you didn't realize you were clinging to. You start to mourn the identity you spent years building, the version of you that fit into the system. You begin to see how much of your life was lived for approval, for validation, for survival. And it hurts, not because it was fake, but because it wasn't full. The grief is real. The confusion is sharp. But in the cracks, something else appears. Space. The kind of space you've never felt before. Space between thoughts. Space to question. Space to feel. And in that space, the first light enters. Quiet, but unmistakable. A sense that you're more than the role you played. That your value is not based on performance. That your worth was never meant to be measured by output. You begin to turn inward, not as an escape, but as a return. You start noticing your breath, the pace of your heart, the sensations in your body. You stop reaching for the next thing and begin listening to the present moment. And what you find isn't perfect. It's raw. It's the pain you've been avoiding, the anger you buried, the needs you silenced. But it's also real. And for the first time in a long time, real feels like relief. You begin to witness your own conditioning. The way you shrink in certain rooms. The way you apologize for existing. The way you anticipate rejection before anyone says a word. And instead of judging it, you hold it. You see it for what it is. Not a flaw, but a pattern. Not your identity, but your armor. Armor that kept you alive when you didn't know another way. And with that seeing comes something radical. Compassion, not the fluffy kind. The deep, earthy kind that says, I see you. I understand why you did what you did. And now we can do it differently. That's the turning point. The moment you stop fighting yourself and start reclaiming yourself, not to fix, not to upgrade, but to remember, to gather all the pieces of you scattered across years of survival and bring them home. The quiet child, the angry teenager, the numb adult, all of them get a seat at your table. You stop trying to be better and start being whole. From the outside, nothing looks different. You still wake up, drink coffee, do your tasks. But inside, everything is changing. You begin to say no to what drains you, even if it disappoints others. You start telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. You rest, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. You let silence stretch without rushing to fill it. And slowly, your nervous system begins to trust you again. You're no longer forcing yourself to perform aliveness. You're actually starting to feel it. Not all the time, not perfectly, but enough to know it's possible. enough to know it's real, enough to know it's yours. And here's where the shift becomes permanent. You realize that freedom doesn't begin with escaping the system. It begins with no longer needing it to tell you who you are. When you no longer seek validation from a structure designed to control you, you take your power back, not in theory, in every breath, every choice, every boundary you hold. This isn't about rebellion, it's about return. A return to rhythm, to presence, to your own inner authority. It's the quietest revolution and the most powerful one. Because it can't be stopped. It doesn't march or shout. It simply refuses to abandon the truth, no matter how loud the noise becomes. You're not losing your mind. You're finding yourself. And that self doesn't need a role, a title, or applause. It just needs space, safety, silence, and slowly it begins to rise. Not as something new, but as something ancient that never left. The part of you that remembers how to live before you were told how to survive. The truth is simple. Your happiness was never taken. It was distracted, fractured, buried under layers of noise, fear, and illusion. The system never stole your soul. It convinced you to forget it. And now it's time to remember. Not someday, not after another achievement or crisis. Now, there is a way back, a path to total happiness, not the fragile, performative kind, but the deep, grounded joy that lives in your bones. It doesn't come from changing the world. It comes from changing your relationship with it, from stepping out of the script, from choosing again and again to live from truth instead of fear. The first step, cut the noise. You cannot hear yourself in a world designed to distract you. Create space. Not forever, not perfectly, but intentionally. Disconnect daily. Let your mind breathe. Don't fill every moment with content. Let silence become your ally again. That's where your clarity lives. Second, reclaim your body. Happiness is not an idea. It's a felt experience. Move, breathe, rest. Walk without a goal. Sit in the sun without guilt. Trust the signals your body gives you. It knows before your mind does. Every time you choose to be present in your body, you step out of the system's grip. Third, question everything you inherited. Not with anger, but with honesty. Is this belief truly yours? Is this desire real or planted? Begin to notice how much of what you chase comes from fear of being unloved, unworthy, unsafe. Then begin to let go, gently, courageously. Strip yourself down to what feels alive. Fourth, stop outsourcing your value. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to impress. You don't need to be productive to be worthy. Measure your days not by what you achieved, but by how real you were. Speak honestly, feel deeply, move slowly. Trust yourself. That is the beginning of unshakable joy. Fifth, honor your energy. Stop leaking it into people, screens, and situations that drain you. If something feels wrong, step back. If someone constantly pulls you out of alignment, step away. Protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. The system feeds on your fatigue. Starve it. Keep your energy close. Sixth, live by inner rhythm. Forget what time it is. Forget what's trending. Listen to what's true inside you. Your cycle, your pulse, your waves. There is a natural timing to your life that no calendar can dictate. When you align with that, joy is not something you create. It becomes your baseline. And last, choose truth over and over, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you approval, even when it hurts. Because every time you choose truth, you heal, you come home. And nothing, no system, no culture, no fear can control a person who lives in truth. That kind of happiness is not loud, but it is unbreakable. You don't need to escape the world. You just need to stop abandoning yourself in it. The game only works when you forget that you are not a piece on the board. You are the player. You are the creator. You are the source. This is not motivation. This is memory, a remembering of who you were before the programming, before the noise, before the pretending. The system may still exist, but now it no longer owns your mind, no longer feeds on your time, no longer decides your worth. You've come back to yourself, and in that return, total joy is not a goal. It's your nature. We're sure you've discovered plenty of value, so subscribe now and stay connected.